It was just another morning on the usual city bus route, where life moved in its steady rhythm, barely catching the attention of anyone who traveled it. The streets were filled with the hum of daily commuters, people who had long since lost the thrill of the ride, their minds preoccupied with the day ahead. Some passengers hopped on without a word, others fumbled with their phones, and a few still managed to give polite nods to the driver as they made their way to their seats. The usual routine for everyone mundane and predictable. The bus itself was nothing special, just a humble vehicle that had seen its fair share of years. The worn-out seats and rattling windows were the least of anyone's concerns. But as always, there was the quiet presence of the bus driver up front. His name was Mr. Harris, an elderly man maybe in his early 70s, with graying hair and a face etched with decades of experience. His skin, though wrinkled, carried a certain dignity that was often overlooked. He sat behind the wheel with a slow, deliberate calmness, his hands steady as they gripped the bus controls. Mr. Harris was a professional. He had been driving the same route for as long as anyone could remember. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, and his back had a slight hunch from years spent behind the wheel. But his eyes still held sharpness, like a well-worn map, able to navigate the roads with precision. Most of the passengers didn't notice him, or if they did, it was only in passing. He was a fixture of their day, a background character in the hustle and bustle of the city. They didn't know his story, and they didn't care to, but he was there every day doing his job without a single complaint. As the bus rolled through the busy streets, the same passengers filed in as they always did, taking their usual spots. The seats near the back filled up first, with young adults settling into the quiet rhythm of their phones, headphones, or the blur of their thoughts. Mr. Harris continued his steady focus on the road ahead, his eyes never straying too far from the wheel. But the peace of the ride wouldn't last long. A group of 3 young men, all in their 20s, boarded the bus a few stops into the route. Their loud, boisterous voices cut through the quiet hum of the bus as they made their way toward the back. It was clear from their careless laughter and casual swagger that they weren't concerned with the others around them, least of all the elderly bus driver up front. One of them, a tall man with messy hair and a leather jacket, leaned forward, casting a quick glance at Mr. Harris. "Look at this guy," he said loudly, his voice filled with mock amusement. "He looks like he's been driving since the 60s. The others laughed, their voices rising in volume as if encouraging each other to make more cutting remarks. They continued to observe the elderly driver, who barely reacted. Mr. Harris had learned long ago to ignore the cruel words of those who saw him as nothing more than a relic of the past. But still, the sting lingered. "The poor guy can barely keep his eyes open," the second man chuckled, his eyes narrowing as he studied the bus driver. "How is he even allowed to drive? He can barely move his hands fast enough to shift gears." A third passenger, a woman sitting nearby, glanced up for a moment, but quickly returned to her phone, not wanting to get involved. But she overheard every word, her discomfort hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The young men continued, oblivious to the rest of the passengers. "Bet he's only driving this bus 'cause he couldn't get another job," the first man said, snickering. Their laughter echoed across the bus, and even a few other passengers, who usually stayed quiet, began to chuckle along, half-heartedly. The old man's uniform, too, became the target of their ridicule, the faded blue jacket, worn at the elbows, and the creased pants that had seen better days. To them, everything about Mr. Harris seemed outdated, and that made him a target for their scorn. As the bus jostled through the city streets, Mr. Harris' hands, slightly trembling with age, adjusted the wheel. The shaking wasn't from fear, it was simply the slow erosion of time, the years of steering this same bus route taking their toll. But his face remained calm, unmoved by their taunts. On the surface, he was unflinching, yet inside his heart hurt, like an old wound that would never fully heal. His thoughts wandered for a moment, back to the days when he had first started driving. He remembered the thrill of earning his first paycheck, the pride of providing for his family, and the long grueling hours that had kept his children fed and clothed. He remembered the sacrifices he'd made, the nights when he barely slept, all to ensure that his family never went without. The years of hard work had shaped him into who he was now, and yet, here he was, being reduced to a joke, a target for mockery from strangers who had no idea what it meant to truly work for a living. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, his grip slightly more firm than before. He had been behind this wheel longer than any of these young men had likely been alive, but they didn't see that. They only saw a frail elderly man, whose very presence made them feel powerful by comparison. And still, Mr. Harris kept his focus on the road. Every bump and turn in his city, no different than the thousands he had navigated before. He wouldn't let them break him. He had too much pride, too much dignity to let the ridicule of a few strangers distract him from the job he had done for so long. The bus had barely moved a few feet before the inevitable happened. Traffic. The dense city streets, always congested during the rush hour, had begun to clog up, bringing the usual flow of commuters to a crawl. The bus slowed to a near stop, and Mr. Harris's hands tightened on the wheel, the slight tremor in his grip becoming more pronounced as the vehicle rolled forward in fits and starts. The mocking laughter that had been a constant in the background grew louder now, fueled by the mounting impatience of the passengers. The young men in the back were particularly vocal, throwing jabs at the elderly driver with every inch the bus failed to move. God, is he even aware of the traffic? He's driving like he's in a retirement home. The first man scoffed, his voice thick with sarcasm. Yeah, this guy probably doesn't even know how to use the brake properly. Can't believe we're stuck with him, the second man added, rolling his eyes as if it were all some grand inconvenience. The older woman seated by the window muttered under her breath, her words cutting through the murmurs around her. How is he still on the road? Shouldn't they make him retire by now? Exactly, said another voice from the middle of the bus. He's way past his prime. It's dangerous for him to be behind the wheel. Someone should report him. Each remark felt like a slap, each word another weight on Mr. Harris's shoulders. The bus crept forward a few inches, then stopped again, as if mocking him right back. His brow furrowed slightly, the corners of his mouth tugging downward for a brief moment. He didn't let it show though. The grip on the wheel remained firm, his posture unyielding. He had been a driver for decades. No matter how many eyes watched him, how many criticisms were thrown his way, he would not let them see him falter. But the longer the bus sat in traffic, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The constant murmur of irritation and impatience from the passengers created an undercurrent of tension, a low hum of discomfort that slowly intensified. There was something else too, a feeling that the situation was teetering on the edge of something more, as if the atmosphere itself were shifting, drawing in the energy of the moment. A pregnant silence fell for a few seconds. The mocking ceased abruptly, and the bus seemed to quiet under the weight of an invisible tension. Even the hum of the engine seemed to dim, as though the world outside the bus was holding its breath. It was a brief moment, but it lingered long enough for a few passengers to glance around, as if they were all expecting something to happen. But no one spoke, no one moved. It was as if the city itself had paused, giving space for something bigger, something that no one could name yet, to unfold. The gentle creak of the bus, the shuffle of feet, and the far-off sounds of honking horns from the streets outside, were the only sounds to fill the silence. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was about to change, like something or someone was going to break through the ordinary. But just as quickly, the tension dissipated. The young men at the back resumed their chatter, their voices loud and obnoxious once again. But the air was different now, and no one could quite shake the feeling that something was coming. Just as the tension in the bus reached its peak, the door slid open with a mechanical hiss. The usual noise of the city outside, the honking cars, the distant chatter, the bustle of the streets, seemed to quiet for a moment as a figure stepped aboard. A man in sunglasses, and a long dark coat, the fabric flowing just so as he moved. His presence was immediately striking, magnetic in a way that was hard to define. The kind of charisma that seemed to fill the space around him, and shift the energy in the room. For a moment, the bus felt like a different place entirely, like the air itself had changed. Passengers who had been talking, laughing, and mocking the elderly driver now fell silent. Their eyes locked onto the man who had just entered, their mouths agape in disbelief. The young men who had been the loudest with their snide remarks about the bus driver were the first to quiet, their jaws slack as they stared, unsure of what to make of the stranger. No one said a word. No one moved. There was something about him, something they couldn't quite place but knew instinctively. It wasn't just the dark sunglasses or the long coat, though those added to his mystique. It was the aura he carried, the feeling of being someone who didn't have to follow the rules, someone whose very presence made everything else seem smaller, less important. Without a second glance at the passengers or the mocking murmurs, the man made his way down the aisle. His steps were smooth, purposeful, each one echoing softly in the suddenly still bus. The chatter died down, replaced by the hushed rustling of people trying to figure out who he was, what he was doing there. When the man reached the front of the bus, his gaze shifted to Mr. Harris, the elderly driver, who had been bracing himself against the quiet storm of mockery, was now staring at the man with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel, but not out of fear, more out of instinct, the same instinct that had kept him on this route for all these years. The stranger stood there for a moment, his calm demeanor cutting through the awkwardness like a sharp knife. Then without a word, he moved closer to the front and sat down right next to the elderly bus driver, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The entire bus seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. The bus was frozen in a strange, almost surreal silence, as the man in the dark coat made his way down the aisle. Every step he took seemed to defy the ordinary, like a shift in the very fabric of reality. As he reached the front of the bus, the passengers couldn't tear their eyes away, watching intently as he stood in front of the elderly driver. But then, in an unexpected move, the man did something none of them could have predicted. Instead of settling into one of the vacant seats in the back, he turned and walked directly to the front. A few passengers blinked in confusion, unsure of what was happening, but no one dared speak up. He didn't stop at the empty seat beside the elderly driver. No. Instead he lowered himself into the seat next to Mr. Harris, the very one that had been the target of so much ridicule just moments before. The man turned to the elderly bus driver, offering him a small knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that spoke volumes of recognition, of something unspoken. It was a smile of solidarity, a quiet connection between two people, worlds apart yet inexplicably linked by the moment. The entire bus seemed to hold its breath. The mocking voices that had been so loud moments earlier fell silent. The young men who had been laughing, who had been making cruel comments about the bus driver, now looked at each other in confusion. They hadn't expected this. No one had. Who was this man? Why had he chosen to sit next to the bus driver of all people? Passengers whispered in hushed tones, glancing between the two men. Who is he? Someone muttered. Is that? Another voice, trembling with excitement, caught the question. It's Johnny Depp, isn't it? The recognition came like a wave. A young woman in the middle of the bus, holding a phone in her hand, snapped a picture as the realization dawned on her. The flashes from her camera illuminated the dim bus, and in that instant, the air shifted again. The passengers stared at the man in disbelief. It was Johnny Depp, the actor, the star, the enigma. A ripple of recognition passed through the bus, from the front to the back, as the murmurs spread like wildfire. But the strange thing was, Johnny Depp didn't seem to care. He didn't acknowledge the excited whispers, or the gawking eyes. He simply sat there, beside the elderly bus driver, without a hint of ego or arrogance. His presence, though quiet, felt like a shield around the two of them, like he had purposely placed himself between Mr. Harris and the rest of the world. The elderly driver for a moment didn't know how to react. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the steering wheel. What was happening? Why was this celebrity here, sitting next to him? He glanced at the young man beside him, who simply smiled again, that knowing, silent smile that seemed to say, I'm here with you. The passengers, still in shock, began to quiet. The atmosphere shifted from one of mockery to one of stunned silence. The rude comments had stopped, replaced by an awkward, respectful stillness. Even the group of young men who had been so loud in their criticisms of Mr. Harris sat back, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. For the first time that morning, the elderly driver felt something he hadn't in a long time: respect. His confidence, shaken by the earlier mockery, seemed to return. He straightened his back, his eyes moving with renewed focus as he guided the bus through the traffic. He didn't say a word to Johnny Depp, nor did Depp speak to him, but there was an unspoken bond between them, a quiet understanding. Here in this moment, they were equals. Both men had experienced the weight of time, the weight of judgment, but now in this fleeting space, they shared something greater. As the bus rolled forward, the atmosphere inside was different, subtly altered, as if the world outside had lost its usual frenetic pace. The The passengers, still processing the presence of Johnny Depp, began to shift in their seats, their earlier attitudes softening. The mockery that had filled the air just moments ago seemed so distant now, replaced by a lingering sense of guilt. One of the young men who had been among the loudest critics of the elderly bus driver shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted between the two men at the front, Mr. Harris and Johnny Depp, both sitting in a silence that somehow conveyed more than any words could. The mocking laughter that had come so easily now felt foolish, immature. A twinge of shame crept into his chest as he thought about how quickly he had dismissed Mr. Harris based on his age and appearance. He had been quick to judge, but now, with Johnny Depp sitting there beside the elderly driver, a strange shift was taking place within him. Maybe he hadn't understood at all. Other passengers, too, began to reflect on their behavior. The young woman who had recognized Johnny Depp put her phone away, staring out of the window, her thoughts turning inward. It was as if the entire bus had collectively begun to question their assumptions, to ask themselves why they had let age or outward appearances dictate their judgment. Why had they been so eager to mock someone just because he was older, slower? Was it simply because they didn't understand the value of experience? Some of the younger passengers, emboldened by the presence of Johnny Depp, leaned forward, attempting to break the silence with questions
directed at him.
"Why'd you sit up here with him?" one asked. "Don't you usually, sit in the back, where all the people are?" But Johnny Depp didn't answer right away. He simply turned his head slightly, offering a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He didn't need to speak. His very choice to sit with the elderly bus driver said everything that needed to be said. He respected him. He understood him. And in doing so, he was quietly teaching everyone around him a lesson, not with grand speeches, but through his actions. By simply sitting beside the bus driver, Depp had sent a powerful message. Respect isn't something that should be earned based on fame or youth, but on dignity, experience, and the quiet strength that comes with living a full life. It was a message that began to sink in for the passengers, even if none of them said it out loud. The ride continued, but the world inside the bus had changed, and for the first time, the passengers were looking at Mr. Harris and at themselves with new eyes. As the bus rolled closer to its final stop, the once bustling atmosphere had settled into an unexpected quiet. The usual noise of passengers gathering their things, shuffling toward the doors, was now laced with something different, a sense of reverence. The young men who had once mocked Mr. Harris sat in silence, staring at their feet, perhaps ashamed of the way they had behaved. The other passengers, too, seemed to have found a new perspective. Their glances toward the elderly bus driver now filled with a quiet respect. Some offered him polite nods as they stood to leave. A few even gave him small, friendly smiles, gestures that had been absent just an hour before. The shift in atmosphere was palpable, and it was clear that the earlier mockery had been replaced by something more genuine. The bus ride, once filled with disdain and dismissiveness, had become a lesson in humility and understanding, and it was all because of a single moment. A small, silent act of kindness that had changed everything. As the bus neared the final stop, Johnny Depp, who had remained seated beside Mr. Harris, stood up with the same calm demeanor he had shown since boarding. He looked down at the elderly driver, offering him a kind smile, one that spoke of mutual respect and quiet understanding. Then, with a slight nod, Johnny turned and made his way toward the exit. The bus door opened with a soft hiss, and as Depp stepped off, the weight of his presence seemed to linger in the air for a moment longer. Mr. Harris watched him go, his expression a mixture of gratitude and surprise. The actor's simple gesture, sitting beside him when no one else would, had been more powerful than words could express. It had been a quiet but profound acknowledgement of the driver's humanity, and that was something Mr. Harris would not forget. The doors closed behind Johnny Depp, and the bus began to roll forward again. The passengers, still processing the events of the ride, sat in a reflective silence. Some glanced at Mr. Harris, the elderly driver who had quietly weathered their mockery, and then been silently honored by one of the world's most famous faces. In that moment, the value of experience, and the importance of respect for the elderly hung in the air like a lingering scent. It was a reminder that sometimes, all it takes is a small act of kindness, a simple quiet gesture, to change the course of a moment, or even a lifetime. The bus continued its journey, but for the passengers on board, the ride would be remembered for far more than just the destinations they reached. It had become a journey of understanding, of reflection, and of gratitude, for the elderly, for the lessons of life, and for the power of respect. As the bus continued its journey, one couldn't help but reflect on the simple yet profound nature of what had just unfolded. It was a story not just of an elderly bus driver and a famous actor, but of human connection, the kind of connection that transcends age, status, and appearance. It reminded us all how easy it is to overlook the worth of someone simply because they don't fit the mold we expect. The elderly driver, who had been dismissed and ridiculed just moments before, had carried with him a lifetime of wisdom, strength, and dignity, qualities that deserve to be recognized and respected. Johnny Depp's unexpected presence on that bus, though brief, became a powerful moment of clarity. It was a quiet lesson in respect and empathy, showing us that sometimes it's the smallest acts, the quiet gestures, the simple choices, that can change everything. In a world that often moves too fast and overlooks the value of experience, this small but profound moment offered a glimpse into the kind of world we all should strive for. One built on kindness, understanding, and respect for those around us. Maybe, just maybe, the bus ride that day was a reminder that we are all more connected than we think, and that even the most fleeting moments can leave lasting impacts. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. This story reminds us that respect, kindness, and understanding can truly change the way we see the world and the people around us. Whether it's a simple act of solidarity or a quiet gesture of support, we all have the power to make a difference in someone else's life. If this story touched you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share with others who might need this reminder today. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that brings us all closer together. Let's continue spreading kindness and respect, one story at a time. Thank you for watching.